picture this. It is August 2nd, 1876, and we are in Deadwood, out in the Dakota Territory.
Right. It's in the middle of the summer, so it's incredibly hot.
Exactly. And the air inside Nuttall and Mann's Saloon number 10 is just stifling. It is, thick with cigar smoke, and you can hear the clatter of poker chips. And there's this man sitting at a table.
And usually this particular man, he absolutely insists on sitting with his back firmly pressed against the wall. Like his eyes are always locked in the front door.
Yeah, it's basically a non-negotiable survival tactic for him. But today, the only open seat at the table actually forces him to turn his back to the room.
Which is a remarkably vulnerable position for a guy who has spent, well, pretty much his entire adult life looking over his shoulder. I mean, he is hyper aware of the danger. He actually asks another player to swap seats with him twice.
But the other guy just refuses.
Right. He refuses. So against every single one of his instincts, he just sits down.
And then, just a few moments later, a shot rings out from behind him. The man slumps forward, and as he falls, he drops his hand of cards right onto the wooden table. 2 pair, black aces and black eights. The legendary dead man's hand.
The guy who dropped those cards is just this absolute pillar of American mythology, James Butler Hickok, better known as Wild Bill.
Right, Wild Bill Hickok. But the real story of Wild Bill isn't just this collection of cool campfire tales, because when you actually look at the sources for our deep dive today, his life is, it's really a masterclass in 19th century PR.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a study in extreme psychological hypervigilance, and it's this incredibly tragic look at the real consequences of living by the gun. I mean, the Hollywood varnish just completely misses the true brutal mechanics of what his life was actually like.
Which is so ironic, right? Because he was actually one of the first people to actively apply that varnish to his own life.
Yeah, he loved the myth.
He really did. But, long before all the myth-making, he was just a kid growing up in Illinois. He was born in 1837, and his family farm actually operated as a station on the Underground Railroad.
Oh, wow, under his abolitionist father, right?
Exactly. So from a really young age, handling a weapon, it wasn't a game for him. It was an absolute necessity for protecting the people who are moving through that perilous network.
Right, it was serious business.
Yeah, and he developed this reputation as a terrifyingly accurate shot with a pistol while he was, still a teenager.
But the funny thing is that skill gets tested early on, and it's not in some heroic shootout. It's actually this completely panicked mistake.
Oh, yeah, the canal incident.
Yeah, so when he's 18, he gets into this brutal fistfight with a local guy named Charles Hudson, and they're fighting, and they actually tumble into a canal. And in the sheer chaos and, the adrenaline of the brawl, they both manage to stagger away. But Hickok mistakenly believes he's killed Hudson.
He just completely panics.
Yeah.
He thinks he's a murderer fleeing the law now. So he abandons his entire life in Illinois and just escapes into the Kansas territory.
And that flight is the catalyst, right?
Yeah, it puts him out on the frontier, which is where he starts to slowly construct this persona of the rugged frontiersman. And one of the most fascinating aspects of that persona is actually a total accident of early technology.
You were talking about his hair, right?
Yes.
Because I love this detail. If you look at the famous old photographs of Hickok from this era, he looks like this dark, brooding gunslinger. He has this jet black hair. But the historical accounts from the time all explicitly state that he had reddish or sandy blonde hair.
Right. The discrepancy is purely technological. It's kind of wild. The early photographic process they used back then relied on wet plate collodion.
Okay, so how did that work?
Well, the silver Hadolian emulsion they used was highly sensitive to blue and ultraviolet light, but it's practically blind to the red end of the light spectrum.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, so because the camera just literally couldn't register the red wavelengths in his hair, it just rendered them as these really dark, heavy shadows.
So a literal glitch in 19th century camera tech accidentally gave him this dark, menacing, cinematic makeover for the history books.
Precisely. Although, to be fair, he wasn't exactly above giving himself a deliberate makeover either.
Oh, definitely not. Which brings us to the nickname Duckbill.
Yes, the dreaded Duckbill.
So apparently in his early days in Nebraska, he had a rather prominent nose and a protruding upper lip, so some of the locals branded him Duckbill. and he just despised it.
I mean, you can't be a legendary gunfighter named Duck Bill.
Right. So what does he do? He grows out this massive, sweeping mustache just to completely obscure his upper lip, and he aggressively rebrands himself as Wild Bill.
It's basically a frontier PR campaign just to shake off a bad nickname.
And it totally worked.
Yeah.
But a PR campaign doesn't make you a lethal gunfighter. The event that really dictated the violent trajectory of his life was actually an animal encounter in 1860.
This is such a crazy story.
Yeah, so Hickok was driving a heavy freight team on the road to Santa Fe, and a cinnamon bear and her 2 cubs are just blocking the path.
And instead of, just waiting it out like a normal person, he dismounts, he walks right up, and he shoots the mother bear in the head.
But the lead bullet literally ricochets off her skull.
Yeah, it just enrages her. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. The bear charges him and completely crushes Hickok under her massive weight.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he manages to fire one more shot, and he hits her paw, but she locks her jaws onto his arm.
That is terrifying.
It really is.
Oh.
And while his arm is just being crushed inside the bear's mouth, Hickok draws his knife with his free hand and manages to slash her throat, and he eventually kills her.
The physical reality of a knife fight with a bear is just horrifying. And he doesn't just walk away from this, obviously. His chest is completely caved in, his shoulder is destroyed, his arm is mangled. He is literally bedridden for 4 months.
Right. And this is the crucial turning point for him. Because if that bear hadn't crushed his chest, he probably would have just continued driving freight across the plains. But his injuries were so permanently debilitating that he could no longer perform heavy labor.
So he needs a new gig.
Exactly. The freight company had to give him this light-duty desk job. So they reassigned him to work as a stable hand and a manager at Rock Creek Station out in Nebraska.
So the bear attack forces him into this stationary job, and that specific location is what puts him directly in the crosshairs of the violence on the frontier.
Exactly. Because in the summer of 1861, this man named David McCall shows up. And McCall is the guy who previously owned the station and had sold it to the freight company on credit.
And he's coming to collect?
Right. He is demanding an overdue property payment.
Yeah.
And McCall is furious. He's threatening the station manager. Meanwhile, Hickok is actually hiding behind a curtain inside the station.
Wait, behind a curtain?
Yes.
Yeah.
And when the confrontation escalates, Hickok just shoots McCall dead from concealment.
Wow. And then he and 2 other employees actually get tried for the killing, right?
They do, but they get acquitted on the grounds of self-defense.
But then Hickok does something that it just completely contradicts the brutal reality of what he just did. He walks over to McCall's widow, apologizes to her for killing her husband, and hands her $35 in restitution.
Which, the historical sources note, was literally every single cent he had to his name at that moment.
It is so bizarre. He shoots a man from behind a curtain and then just empties his pockets to the widow. But, this incident puts his name on the map. After that, he spends the Civil War serving as a scout and a spy for the Union Army, which really hardens him significantly.
Definitely. And by the time the war ends in 1865, he's down in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah.
And he is just fully immersed in the gambling culture, which leads us to his dispute with Davis Tutt.
Right. And this dispute over a gambling debt essentially invents the modern cinematic concept of the Western shootout.
It really does. So Hickok and Tutt have been arguing for weeks, possibly over women, but it really boils over during a poker game. Hickok ends up losing a gold watch to Tutt.
And this was a watch that had, deep sentimental value to Hickok, right?
Yeah. Hickok explicitly warns Tutt, do not wear that watch in public.
But Tutt, wanting to humiliate him, just parades the watch around the town square.
Yeah, Tutt's ego demanded that he show off the prize. So the 2 men finally face off in the Springfield town square. They stand sideways to present a smaller profile, the classic dueling stance.
Right.
And they draw their weapons. Tutt fires first, and he misses. Hickok fires just a fraction of a second later, striking Tutt squarely through the heart from roughly 75 yards away.
Okay, let's stop right there for a second and just look at the mechanics of this. Because 75 yards is an absurd distance for a handgun, especially in 1865.
It borders on the impossible.
Yeah.
Hickok was likely using a Colt Navy .36 caliber cap and ball revolver.
Right.
That uses loose black powder and a round lead ball. And at 75 yards, a round ball sheds its velocity incredibly rapidly. It drops significantly in flight, and even just a slight breeze will push it off course.
And the sights on those guns were terrible.
The iron sights were incredibly crude. To hit a target, The exact size of a human heart at that distance requires not just an ice-cold nerve, to stand still while someone is literally shooting at you,
Yeah.
but an almost supernatural calculation of ballistics.
It is a statistical anomaly mixed with pure adrenaline. And Tut yells out, "Boys, I'm killed!" And then he dies. So Hickok is arrested for murder, which later gets reduced to manslaughter. But the trial is where the legal system of the era really reveals its massive flaws.
Oh, totally. So the presiding judge, this guy named Sempronius Boyd, he gives the jury two entirely contradictory instructions. First, he correctly instructs them on the actual legal definition of self-defense.
Right.
And he notes that Hickok did not meet this standard because he willingly walked into the town square to engage in a mutual combat duel.
Right, because he could have just walked away or, I don't know, called the local authorities.
Exactly. But then Judge Boyd adds this crazy caveat. He tells the jury that if they felt the threat to Hickok was genuine, they could just apply the unwritten law of the, quote, fair fight and acquit him.
Wait, so a sitting judge openly instructed a jury that they could just ignore the actual written law of the land if they felt the duel was culturally fair.
Yep.
How is that a functioning justice system?
Well, it wasn't. It was frontier pragmatism overriding statutory law. And the jury took the judge's loophole, and they cleared Hickok completely.
And that acquittal didn't just free him, it literally launched him into the stratosphere of fame. Because just a few weeks later, a journalist named George Ward Nichols publishes this incredibly exaggerated interview with Hickok in Harper's New Monthly magazine.
Yes, and in this article, Hickok claims to have personally killed hundreds of men with his own hands.
Hundreds.
I mean, the local newspapers out west where people actually knew him, they wrote these blistering rebuttals just mocking the article.
But the wealthy readers back east completely swallowed it, didn't they?
They absolutely did. Hickok went viral. The mythology outpaced his actual life instantly. And he weaponized that fame to secure these really high-paying, high-status jobs as a lawman.
Right. He serves as marshal in volatile trail towns like Hays, Kansas, and later Abilene.
But that viral fame came with a massive target on his back. Every drunk, aspiring tough guy with a gun wanted the bragging rights of being the man who, quote-unquote, took down Wild Bill.
Right. So his time as a lawman was just defined by these constant lethal challenges. Like in Hays, this drunk cowboy named Bill Mulvey decided to make a name for himself. He gets the drop on Hickok out in the street and levels a cocked rifle directly at him.
And Hickok is completely caught off guard.
Right. But instead of drawing his gun, Hickok looks just past Mulvey's shoulder and yells, "Don't shoot him in the back, he is drunk."
It is a brilliant psychological trick.
It really is. Because Mulvey, assuming someone is sneaking up behind him, spins his horse around, and in the split second Mulvey turns his head, Hickok draws and shoots him through the temple.
It's a perfect example of his survival instincts. But living in that constant state of life or death hypervigilance, it takes a devastating psychological toll on a person.
Yeah.
You cannot operate on a hair trigger forever without your system misfiring. And that tragic misfire finally happens in Abilene in 1871.
And the crazy thing is, the origin of this tragedy is so profoundly petty.
So petty.
He gets into a dispute with a saloon owner named Phil Coe, and Coe decides to paint a giant bull with an erect penis on the side of his tavern as an advertisement.
Naturally, the town citizens complain. So Hickok, in his capacity as the marshal, orders Coe to remove it, but Coe flat out refuses.
So Hickok takes it upon himself to physically alter the painting.
Yes.
So just to be clear, the deadliest gunfighter in the West is essentially engaging in a lethal standoff over a zoning dispute and petty vandalism.
That is exactly what it was. And a few days later, Coe fires a gun out in the street. When Hickok sprints over to confront him, Coe claims he was just shooting at a stray dog.
Which, amazingly, was legal in Abilene at the time.
Remarkably, yes. But as Hickok is talking to him, Coe suddenly turns his weapon on Hickok.
And Hickok's reflexes just take over instantly. He draws and fires, hitting Coe in the stomach.
Right.
But the street is chaotic, right? It's smoky, it's loud, and Hickok is flooded with adrenaline.
Right.
Out of the corner of his eye, he sees another figure rushing aggressively toward him. And without even thinking, Hickok fires 2 more shots into the approaching figure.
But it wasn't one of Coe's friends. It was Mike Williams, Hickok's own special deputy, who was actually running into the line of fire to help Hickok.
Oh, wow. So he killed his own friend.
He did.
Think about the psychology here for a second. Imagine your brain is a computer, and it's running this massive high-security threat detection scan in the background 24/7.
Yeah.
It eats up all your cognitive RAM.
Right.
You're constantly analyzing every shadow, every footstep.
Hmm.
Eventually, a false positive is going to trigger the firewall and just crash the whole system. That's what happened in Abilene.
Exactly.
His survival instinct simply bypassed his conscience judgment.
That is a perfect analogy. The reflex that had saved his life a dozen times finally betrayed him, and the historical record shows that this completely broke him.
I can imagine.
He was haunted by the death of Mike Williams for the rest of his life. The city council fired him shortly after that, and Hickok never fought in another gunfight again.
So, stripped of his badge and carrying this immense guilt, his life enters this really steep, depressing decline. He tries to monetize his viral fame by going into show business, but he is completely unsuited for it.
He really was.
Yeah.
He attempts to stage this massive outdoor show at Niagara Falls in 1872 called the Daring Buffalo Chase of the Plains.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Ships a monkey, a bear, and several buffaloes all the way out east. But because it's an outdoor venue, the tourists just stand back and watch from the perimeter without actually paying.
Of course.
And the buffalo are terrified, and they refuse to perform. So, in a fit of frustration, Hickok fires a blank cartridge into the air.
Which instantly causes the buffalo to stampede. They crash right through the wire fencing and run directly into the terrified audience. It's a complete financial and logistical disaster.
Absolute chaos. And later on, he reluctantly joins his old friend Buffalo Bill Cody's theatrical acting troupe.
And he hated that, right?
Oh, he despised it. I mean, here's a man who survived the real brutal realities of the frontier, now forced to play this cartoonish caricature of himself for clapping Easterners.
Right.
He hated the stage so much that he would deliberately hide behind the painted scenery. And when the stagehands aimed the spotlight at him to try and force him out, he would literally draw his revolver and shoot the spotlight out, shattering the glass.
Which is somewhat ironic, considering that the stage lights actually physically hurt him because he was rapidly going blind.
Yes, by his late 30s, his legendary eyesight was failing.
Wow. Do we know what caused it?
Well, medical historians have debated it for decades. Some suggest it was severe trachoma, which is a bacterial infection. Others point to glaucoma or potentially even secondary syphilis. But whatever the biological mechanism was, the greatest marksman in the West could barely see his targets anymore.
That is incredibly sad.
He was destitute. The man who tamed the trail towns was actually arrested multiple times in Wyoming just for vagrancy.
There is a brief flash of hope, though, right? In March of 1876, he marries Agnes Thatcher Lake. She was a 45-year-old circus owner, and they had been exchanging letters for years.
Right. But the domestic life just doesn't stick for him. Within months, he leaves her, and he joins a wagon train to try and strike it rich in the gold fields of Deadwood.
But he knows his time is up. He writes Agnes this hauntingly fatalistic letter from the trail. He says, quote, "Agnes, darling, if such should be we never meet again, while firing my last shot, I will gently breathe the name of my wife Agnes, and with wishes even for my enemies, I will make the plunge and try to swim to the other shore."
He was a dead man walking. He even told his close friend Charlie Utter that he had a real premonition he would not leave Deadwood alive.
Which brings us right back to Saloon No. 10, August 1876.
Right.
And the crazy part is, the assassination isn't the result of some grand rivalry. The day before, Hickok is playing poker and watches a drunk gambler named Jack McCall lose heavily.
Yeah.
Hickok, perhaps feeling a rare moment of pity, tells McCall to quit while he's behind and hands him a few dollars to go buy some breakfast.
But McCall takes the cash, and his ego is just deeply bruised by the charity.
And that perceived slight is the catalyst.
Exactly. The next day, McCall walks into the saloon. He sees the half-blind Hickok sitting with his back exposed, and he shoots him right in the back of the head, yelling, "Take that!"
Hickok dies instantly, dropping the black aces and eights. But the insanity of the Old West doesn't stop with the murder. The immediate aftermath highlights everything that was wrong with frontier justice.
Oh, it really does.
A group of locals form an impromptu, quote-unquote, miners' jury right there in Deadwood to put Jack McCall on trial.
And McCall takes the stand and just completely invents a story. He claims he shot Hickok in revenge because Hickok supposedly murdered McCall's brother down in Kansas years earlier.
And the miners, swayed by this tragic tale of brotherly vengeance, just acquit him entirely.
You do.
So he just walks free.
Yeah.
He murders a man in front of a dozen witnesses and beats the charge because he spun a good yarn.
Yep. But McCall's ego ruins him again. He leaves Deadwood and starts bragging at other saloons about how he was the man who killed Wild Bill. Federal authorities catch wind of this and they rearrest him.
Wait, what about double jeopardy? You can't be tried for the same crime twice, right?
In a functioning legal system, no, you can't. But This requires looking at the geopolitical reality of Deadwood in 1876.
Right.
Deadwood was essentially an illegal squatter camp situated on land granted to the Lakota Sioux under the Treaty of Fort Laramie. It was unorganized, unrecognized territory, so the miners' jury had zero federal or state legal authority.
Oh.
Because the first trial wasn't legally binding in the eyes of the United States, double jeopardy didn't apply. The federal court in Yankton tried him for real, found him guilty, and hanged him.
And as a grim footnote, the sources note that when McCall's body was moved from its original grave years later, the hangman's noose was still wrapped around his neck.
Speaking of moving bodies, Hickok's burial involves one of the most bizarre scientific phenomena in the Old West.
This is wild. So his friend Charlie Utter buried him in the original Deadwood cemetery. But 3 years later, the town was expanding, and they needed to relocate the graveyard to Mount Moriah Cemetery.
And when they dug Hickok up, they found he hadn't decomposed at all.
Right, he had petrified.
Yes, the specific soil composition in that original graveyard was heavily saturated with groundwater that was extremely rich in calcium carbonate.
Okay.
Over those 3 years, that mineral-heavy water seeped into his wooden coffin. And through a process called permineralization, the calcium carbonate crystallized inside the cellular spaces of his tissue, literally molecule by molecule.
Replacing the organic matter with literal stone.
Precisely. The men moving his coffin reported that tapping on his flesh sounded like tapping on a brick wall.
Wow.
They estimated his petrified body weighed between 400 and 500 pounds. He had quite literally become a heavy stone monument to his own legend.
That is unbelievable. And, we can't close out his burial without addressing the Calamity Jane of it all, because in her later autobiography, she claimed she had been romantically involved with and even secretly married to Hickok.
A claim that the historical record thoroughly debunks. Hickok viewed her as a complete nuisance at best.
Yet, when she died decades later, the men organizing her burial decided to place her plot right next to Hickok's. And why? Because they knew Hickok had absolutely no use for her while he was alive. Burying her next to him for eternity was orchestrated by her friends as a massive posthumous practical joke on Wild Bill.
It perfectly encapsulates the collision of history and myth, really.
Okay.
James Butler Hickok's life highlights the massive tragic gap between the romanticized dime novel Old West and its brutal, uncompromising reality.
Yeah, he was a man who survived by his reflexes, he capitalized on his own exaggerated press, but ultimately he died a half-blind vagrant, shot in the back of the head over a few dollars of breakfast money.
And his death leaves us with a really profound question about the nature of frontier justice. I mean, think about Jack McCall's first trial. He completely got away with murder in plain sight simply because he told an ad hoc jury a sympathetic story about a fictitious dead brother.
It's crazy. In an era where a man's life could end over a pawned gold watch or a crude painting on a tavern wall, how much of the quote-unquote law in the Old West was actually based on justice? And how much of it was just deciding who told the better story? Something to think about the next time you hear someone romanticizing the gunslingers of the frontier. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us, and keep questioning the myths you think you know.